Well, here we are again. I could stand here for 20 minutes, or I could say something. Look, today we're going to do something which is a little bit difficult, and most likely we won't get an answer, but we'll attempt. I'm looking for the elusive Australian soul. Now, I'm not talking about a soul based on spirituality, but a soul based on sentiments and feelings which defines a sovereign nation state. It can be quite easy to define certain characteristics in nation states that have a common language, common culture, common heritage, even a common religion. But it's much more difficult to define the sentiments and feelings of a nation which is based on successful colonisation of First Nations people. Now, obviously there are commonalities as far as both entities are concerned, and the most significant commonality is the self-preservation, both on an individual and a state level. Now, when we talk about self-preservation, we're talking about preservation of the status quo. And obviously the status quo changes in different sovereign nation states. So what is important in one area may not be important in another. Now, obviously, in a sovereign nation state based on colonisation, there are two significant issues. The first one is the state of those First Nations, the people that belong to those First Nations. And the second one is the reason people have left their traditional homelands and come to colonise. Now, these are important issues in terms of determining the feelings and sentiments of a people or a nation state. They're not necessarily interlinked, but they can be. So it's a difficult entity, but we need to know what those sentiments and feelings are, because they determine everyday reality for each and every one of us, whether we're colonisers, descendants of colonisers, immigrants, whether we've been here for 6 generations or 2,000 generations, as in the case of First Nations people, because it determines ultimately the type of society we are. So what are the commonalities as far as the Australian feelings and sentiments are concerned in 2024? Where does it come from? Where are we heading? Now, interestingly, federal elections, to a significant degree, in a liberal democratic parliamentary system, give us an indication of the feelings and sentiments of a people, especially if the political process is dominated by political parties with specific policies. Now, initially, colonisation was rapid, It was brutal. It was almost complete. First Nations people were driven off their lands and barely survived, although things are changing in 2024. So who benefited from that colonisation process? Who were the real beneficiaries? Because that gives us an indication of the feelings and sentiments, not just of that period, 220 years ago, but of today. The main beneficiaries were the squatters. They were the main beneficiaries of the depopulation of the land of First Nations inhabitants in the most brutal fashion. It wasn't the convicts or the ticket of leave men and women which made up the bulk of the early colonisation thrust. It was the squatters. Now, Victoria, which I'm familiar with, within 15 years of the colonisation process beginning in the mid-1830s, 700 squatters had claimed the whole of Victoria as their personal property. And the struggle since the dispossession of First Nations people has been a struggle to wrest land and power from that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. The squatters were successful because the satanic mills in the 1830s in Britain required wool. 50% of the wool which reached England and Scotland and Wales during that period came from the colonies of Victoria and New South Wales. But who benefited? Who benefited? How has that fashioned us as a people? Well, the easiest way to deny, to deal with unpleasant realities is to deny them. And this country was based on the denial that this country was inhabited. It wasn't until 1992 when the High Court of Australia on the 3rd of June 1992 during the historic Mabo decision came to the conclusion that Indigenous Australians, First Nations people, had rights to land in law if they had continued occupation since colonisation. A limited way forward, but an important way forward because it actually acknowledged the past. At the same time, we have seen struggles, first from convicts, then ticket of leave men and women, then immigrants, then the gold diggers who came during the gold rush who didn't make any money, to claim back some of that land in order to provide for their basic necessities. At the same time, after World War II, it was decided that a country with a population of 5 million would not be able to withstand a future invasion. So the whole policy was turned on its head. Before World War II, the White Australia policy was supreme. And the White Australia policy occurred for one very good reason. It occurred because of the struggle between protectionist and free traders. And free traders, for significant periods of time, dominated economic activity in this country. And the so-called free traders were based on the principle of cheap labour. And free traders used blackbirding of Kanaks, people from the Pacific, to be used as indentured workers. They also used the Chinese, which had come here, who were able to go back to China, although if they hadn't found any gold, as cheap labour in competition with the Anglo-Saxon and the white population. So this created a great deal of hatred and division in the 1890s. This divide and rule mentality suited the free traders to a T because it drove down wages. It increased their profitability. And this seed of division had a profound impact at the moment of federation on the 1st of January 1901, where six colonies became one sovereign nation state, and Australia achieved some independence from the United Kingdom. What we saw, that the policies that were passed and implemented were policies which were based on race. And the White Australia policy and apartheid of First Nations people was instrumental in the type of nation that was created. So during these 60 years, 50 to 60 years, we saw a God, King and country mentality based on white supremacy. After World War II, the policy was turned on its head. Although it took 20 to 25 years to be completely abolished, the White Australia policy was jettisoned for self-preservation, not for any other reason, but for self-preservation. It was felt that 5 million people living in a continent could provide no real resistance to any foreign invasion, especially when the United Kingdom had cut its ties and no longer rule the waves. And the association with the United States of America had its ups and downs. So migration became important. So what type of people leave their homeland, leave their traditions, leave their families? Normally people who are desperate, people who want to create a new life, free of the strictures of where they come from, free of the ravages of war. So obviously when these people come, they come with very little. And they then work hard in order to acquire basic necessities: housing, food, education for their children. So the mentality which is created is a mentality which has no past and in many regards no future, apart from a future based on materialism. So when you have a future which is based on materialism, acquiring goods surplus to your needs, acquiring land surplus to your needs, and when you have the same relationship between the mass of people and those that exercise power and centralise wealth in their hands, you have the same conditions that we saw in the 19th century, where hatred and division is fanned by political forces which need a docile, acquiescent labour force which is only interested in material gains. So when you look at the feelings and sentiments which fashion political opinion, which fashion culture, which fashion our economic system, what we see is ideas which promote division and hatred. So although on the surface this country is described as the land of milk and honey, and although on the surface we are told that multiculturalism is an acceptable aspect of this country, the fact is that in 2024 we are seeing divisions emerge, and more importantly, divisions emerge which seem more and more difficult to be able to overcome. Irrespective of legislation, the fact is that we live on the same continent. The fact is that as far as our feelings and sentiments are concerned, we are not that interested as a people in a reconciliation with this country's First Nations people, let alone treaties and truth-telling. The fact is that what we have done since Federation, especially in the last 50 years, during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation phase of our existence, which pushes materialism as the essence of Australian life. What we have seen is progress that was made by people who are working has disappeared. What we are seeing is a change of culture, where there is no culture, there is no cohesion. The only thing that seems to matter is the amount of wealth that people can acquire, not even power, but wealth. It's about more than self-preservation. And the dilemma is that ultimately those who are not part of the investment class, the 8% of Australians who have the disposable income, and the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, the rest of us are no better than wage slaves, or if we're on social security benefits, and 1/3 of the Australian population is, we have to live a hand-to-mouth existence on a week-to-week basis. So when I look at the feelings and sentiments which define us in 24, they haven't changed. It's about self-preservation. It's about looking after the interests of those who you know. It's not about creating a more egalitarian community. It's not about sharing power. It's not about a common culture. It's not about even a common language. There is very little that binds us together except the earth we stand on. And how much of that earth we own determines the life we and our children and their children are able to live in the future. So if we're looking for sentiments and feelings, it can be summed up in one word: self-preservation of the individual. Self-preservation of families individuals are concerned with. Self-preservation with your job. Self-preservation with that little people have been able to acquire. And as far as the rest of the community is concerned, they are seen more as competitors than people we can collaborate with, because having an economic system based on a private investment for private profit mentality in no way creates a common culture, and in no way creates a unified nation.